Started, and I have this extraordinary group assembled here to talk about the changing rules of leadership and new rules for a new era. Let me start first on my left. We have Jenny Lefcourt, who was a serial entrepreneur turned venture capitalist. She's a general partner at a VC called Freestyle and was also the co-founder, I think, of The Wedding Channel and Bella Pictures. So we'll get into that in a few moments. We have Dave Gilboa, who I bet everyone in the room knows, co-founder and co-CEO. I used to say only women could do that, but I guess men can too, of Warby Parker, which, as we all know, has changed eyewear and retail and maybe like the whole basis of how business should work. And to Dave's left, we have Anjali Sood, whose name I practiced saying.
Nailed it.
Anjali is the CEO of Vimeo, which is an IAC company. Remarkably, she came into that job, I think, a year ago, having come up through the inside and spent, I think, a long tour in marketing at Amazon before that, and then in finance before that. So we're going to get right into it. I want to start with you, Jenny. You said something extraordinary to me earlier this week when we were getting to know each other, that you started your career as a CPA, I think very briefly, hated it, became an entrepreneur, loved it, were very successful, and then became a VC. But it wasn't until you became a VC that you paid attention to the fact that you were a woman. Can you say a little more about that and tell us why?
Yeah, so I was saying that for whatever reason, my entire career, I just didn't really notice, or notice is maybe the wrong word, but didn't seem to care that I was a woman, didn't seem to get in my way of doing my job. And I became a VC, and then suddenly everyone just kept on referring to me as a woman and talking about the stats. And I at first was a little dismissive of it, like, let's not get into that, let's all just get our work done. But then I was reading more and more and more. And let's just say ignorance had been bliss for me for a while. And the more I read, the more disheartening it became, where you just couldn't deny the data anymore. And I think to some extent, it had gotten worse. There were fewer women founders who received venture capital. There were fewer women who were venture capitalists than there had been maybe a decade or two prior. So I think part is that it had changed, and part is my eyes got open to a real issue. And then the more I learned, the more I was able to dig in and understand what are the underlying issues that are driving the data, and understanding that, and then trying to figure out how I could have a positive impact.
So talk a little bit about that. What are the structural things that are stopping us from having more diverse leadership teams, and what are you able to do about it now that maybe you weren't before because you didn't see it?
Yeah, and I think it's different sometimes in large organizations versus in starting companies versus venture capital. So I'll start with the world that I know really well, and that's venture capital. And it is a network-based business. And so business is happening by who you know, who you're connected with, and whatnot. It's happening on the golf course or in dinners after hours and whatnot. And so you had all these peers doing business in sort of a non-business environment. And so it made sense that while there were some women, those women were not at a lot of those events where the real business and the real power was going down. And so that's the first thing that I was fascinated with when I came into being a VC is the women that have been here, why did they leave? And people are like, well, they weren't successful. I'm like, I am very suspicious that those women just flat out weren't successful. And it turned out that if you just didn't have the same power network or access to the power network, you actually couldn't be as successful. So it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think that's part of it, and that's more venture. And I think to some extent for founders, it's a similar thing. And also for founders, you go and you present to someone, and when we VCs are taking on high risk, it feels really good for something to feel familiar. You feel familiar to me. We see the world the same way, and that removes a little bit of risk, which is flat out wrong. It just feels like it does. So a man was receiving funding in a way that a woman wasn't, because the men were the ones writing the checks. So when you go into bigger corporations, the thing that I've learned by reading and speaking with others, but haven't lived myself, is that there's this same kind of idea of where do people feel that they are included, right? So it isn't just about having a diverse team, it's about diversity and inclusion. And so it turns out that just being one at the table isn't nearly as powerful as being two or three, because that's the way your voice really gets heard. So there's so many issues, and I don't want to hog the whole panel about them, but one of the biggest things is if the leadership team is not aware of the power of diversity and how much of a positive impact that has on decision making and on profitability, then the path of least resistance is you're going to have a lot of people who are a cultural fit, which is sort of a bad code name for we all think the same, look the same, and act the same. And so if you don't really actively work against that, that's what takes over. So it makes sense that a certain group is going to rise to the top, a powerful top, and many others are not.
Let me ask you one more question. You can give me a short answer to it, which is, do you think we are in a moment where this is really changing faster or not?
So I do believe we're in a moment where it's changing faster. I'm so happy to say that. And just really quickly, the reason I believe it is that it's being done for the right reasons. People are actually understanding that diversity is a powerful competitive advantage. And to be without it, there's great harm, and we can talk about that. And because of that, because it's not just checking a box or because, PR calls, or, if there's a story, I don't want to look bad. Those are the old ways, and that's why I think it was not happening. But now that people actually believe in the impact it will have on true bottom line business, I believe it's truly changing.
Great. So I love the notion of those are the old ways. Anjali, I want to go to you. As I said when I introduced you, I'm fascinated by your journey. So you came in, I think it's pretty unusual, came into Vimeo, an important tech company, as a marketer. You're not an engineer by training, and now you're running the company. You're the CEO. So I want to ask you, with your reference to old ways in mind, what did you think good leadership was in 2014 when you came in to run marketing? And what do you think it is now that you're running the whole company?
Yeah, so I think my story is probably a classic one of intrapreneurship, which is I'm not a founder or an entrepreneur, but in many ways my path internally at Vimeo was employing a lot of the same tactics that founders do to kind of change the rules. And I think in terms of my view of leadership, I came into a role and a company where you have a clear path, right? There's structures, you see the people above you, you kind of know what you need to do to move up to the next level and the next level and the next level. And my perceptions of leadership were, it's people who, they follow the steps. They follow the steps, and some people follow them faster, and some people follow them slower. And my perception of what a strong leader was or a successful leader was probably very stereotypical and sort of based on the general things that you would think about. Now, so having the hindsight of looking back at my own experience and also working with other very talented leaders at my company, there's a couple of things I've learned. One, I do think you can rewrite the rules internally at organizations. We don't talk about it enough. There's a lot of conversation around entrepreneurship, but for many of you, if you're at large organizations, you can change the way that those organizations work internally.
Can I pause there? Give an example of that.
Yeah. So I think my story is I came in to run marketing. I was running a small team in marketing, and the company was focusing on a certain strategy, and I had a different idea for how we should run the business. And so I looked where others weren't looking, and I basically found an area of the business that no one really cared about. And I asked for a small team, sort of a SWAT team, to come in and experiment and try and prove out my idea. And it was one of those, I would have never, if I had asked for a big promotion or a big, formal authority to do something, I probably wouldn't have gotten it. But because it was low risk for the company to sort of, okay, fine, let her do this thing. We're not really betting the farm on it, or anyways. I was able to show results, and then that led to my ability to then formally own something, and then eventually that strategy became our overall strategy. So I think looking where others aren't looking is it's a really interesting way that you can kind of change the rules.
I love that. So I have to ask you, I read that a very small percentage of women who are CEOs actually set out to become CEOs. It's like less than 15%. And I want to ask you, did you think you wanted to be a CEO?
I'm in that percentage. Yeah. I always say I was very ambitious as a child. I am still sort of very unapologetically ambitious as an adult. And I actually grew up always wanting to be a leader and wanting to be a business leader. And for me, I certainly didn't predict or expect it would happen the way it did at Vimeo. But for me, I made a lot of explicit choices in my career. When I moved a lot and did a lot of different functions. That was explicitly so that I would get a diverse experience that I thought would make me a better decision maker, so that I could eventually be an operator. So I am in the minority of people who this was my dream, and when I stepped into the role, it was like a dream come true.
I love to hear it, and I love that you're saying it. And Dave, I have to ask you the same question. So I think you were at Allen and Company, like at a merchant bank, 8 or 9 years ago, and now you're a co-founder and CEO. Did you say, I want to run a company? Did you know that?
No, it's never an explicit goal. I was 100% sure I was going to become a doctor when I was a kid. Both my parents are doctors. My sister's a nurse practitioner. I think my parents are still hoping I'll go back to med school one day. But I think they instilled in me that your profession should not just be an opportunity to earn a paycheck, that you should do something that's meaningful and provides value and helps other people in the world. And so that was always my goal, and I thought that kind of gaining some business skills, first at Bain and then Allen and Company, was a way to basically have the skill set and tools to hopefully be an effective manager or leader one day, but was never an explicit goal to start a company or become a CEO.
Get those skills for the orthopedic surgery kind of thing. That's what mom and dad wanted. So you have started this company that allows us to buy our glasses in our pajamas, and also that has made many people who wouldn't have access to prescription eyewear have that access. And you've changed the way a lot of people think about businesses, sort of role in and impact on the world. I want to ask you, did you set out to do that? And also, how do you think about sort of businesses broader, not your business, but all businesses, broader responsibility to society? Is it more than profit?
Yes, it really started with Parker to solve my own problem and the problem that my co-founders had, which is that I personally lost an expensive pair of glasses and couldn't figure out why they were so expensive. And as I was complaining to anyone that would listen, including all my classmates at Wharton at the time, realized that this was a common problem, and my 3 co-founders had broken their glasses, lost their glasses, couldn't figure out why they had to pay several $100s for them. It's technology that's been around for 800 years, and so that was kind of when the wheel started turning about the business opportunity. But all of us either came from families or had values instilled in us, again, that you should be doing something good in the world, or coming from the nonprofit world. And so we spent as much time talking about how we could build a social mission into this organization as we did about kind of how do you actually make glasses more affordable, or how do you sell them online. And we wanted to make sure that we were building in a social mission into the DNA of the company, so that as the company hopefully got bigger, the impact that we had was also multiplied. And we thought that there was kind of this moment in time where we felt like there were more and more consumers and employees like us that wanted to support brands and work for organizations that were aligned with their individual values, and so we really set out to launch. We're an unapologetically for-profit business, but that one that does good in the world. And we fundamentally believe that it is a competitive advantage for us to have a social mission. It's the number one reason that people want to work for us. It's the number one reason that people stay at the company longer than they do at other brands or other retailers, other technology companies, is because they recognize that their work is having a broader impact. And so we think that there's a huge opportunity for us to have impact ourselves. We've now distributed over 4 million pairs of glasses to people in need, and hopefully solve the issue that around vision disability around the world. But we also want to really be an example for how other organizations, how for-profit businesses can be run. And we don't think that employees, our customers, investors should have to make any sacrifices to work for, support, or invest in a company like ours. And so one of our goals is to really be the best for-profit business that we can be. And again, think about our social mission really as an investment where hopefully we're getting the best ROI on those dollars that we're spending towards our efforts on that front, because we're able to attract and retain the most talented people in the world.
So stay on the people thing. I'll ask you all about this, but I want you to start, Dave. You've been very outspoken about the employee life cycle, like the customer life cycle. I don't know if I have the words right, but that employees matter as much as customers, if not more, in some ways. What's actually different about the relationship if you work at Warby Parker? How's your relationship to work different than it might be if you work somewhere else?
I think probably the biggest thing is the connection to our social mission. So one thing we do, just as an example for anyone who's been at the company for 3 years, we'll fly them somewhere in the world to go out and meet our nonprofit partners, to go out into rural areas, actually help administer vision tests, put glasses on people's faces for the first time. And now we've led dozens of these trips. Many of our employees had to get passports for the first time. It's their first time leaving the country. And they're out in rural villages in Guatemala or El Salvador. And it has a really profound impact on their life, whether they're doing their main job responsibilities are in customer service, or they're a supply chain analyst, or they're working on our accounting team. Just recognizing that as an organization, we're able to have tremendous impact around the world, and then connecting it back to their work and providing meaning, and in that way, I think has been hugely powerful for us. And more recently, we've started efforts in New York and Baltimore to give glasses to school children in need, particularly in low-income areas. We think they're out of the 1.1 million children in New York City public schools. We think 200,000 of them need glasses and don't wear them. And I was just at a school in the Bronx, and they have a class there for children that are learning 4 grades below where they should be based on their age. There were 23 kids in that class. We brought in an eye doctor. None of those kids wore glasses, and 19 out of the 23 of them needed glasses. And so there are huge opportunities in our own backyard. And so kind of outside of these trips to other countries, having some of these programs where our entire team can participate has been hugely impactful as well.
It's amazing. I want to get a little bit more personal with all of you, because we're in a room full of leaders who themselves are, I imagine, sorting out how do I do this at my best. And Anjali, I want to ask you, I read that you talked about showing your vulnerability as a really important part of how you lead. Talk to the group about that, and tell us anything else in there that that we might not otherwise think is a leadership trait.
Sure. So, I mean, I started my career in investment banking, and I worked for a firm where I was the only woman. And I used to think that you should never project weakness or admit that you're wrong, because that would make you not feel like strong as a leader. And what I've learned in a year plus as CEO is I think vulnerability is an incredible sign of strength and leadership. And what I've sort of seen in practice is a couple things. One, practicing vulnerability means practicing self-awareness, right? You have to be honest with yourself about where your shortcomings are. And by doing that, first of all, just inside, it helps you identify areas to improve, both for yourself as a leader as well as for the business. And then actually vocalizing that, apologizing when you make a mistake, raising your hand when you make a mistake. That is actually extremely powerful, and often I think it not only builds trust among your team, it creates a culture where everybody starts to feel comfortable being more self-critical, and it just means that we'll, again, make better decisions as a business. So I practice vulnerability as much as I can. I think it's an important trait for leaders, and ultimately I think it will lead to better business decisions, and sort of there's an ROI on that in and of itself.
I love that. And you practice apologizing. Jenny, I want to apologize for this question, but you and I were talking about how we're in the same sort of time in our lives in terms of our careers. Young leaders. Let me ask you, what are you still working on? What's the stuff that still doesn't feel like it comes without practice or some kind of mechanistic training?
I'm going to answer it in a truly authentic way, but it may not give you what you're looking for, which is that the older I get, the more it's real. And I'm not trying to be something that I'm not. And I'm recognizing that there's power in just showing up completely as who you are. And who you are doesn't mean just showing up and having it go one way. I have 3 children, and they're all of an age where they have voices. And so it's made me a better leader. I think I'm a better listener. I think I'm better at understanding different people's needs. I have 3 children. They all are very different. And so every person that I am managing or helping is somewhat different. So I guess I would say if I made mistakes in the past, it's trying too hard to be something other than who I am. And now I think I'm sort of a little bit more of a pure form. Now, that still is focused on a growth mindset. I learn new things every day. And the other thing I think I've done is I beg for feedback. I only know what I know, and I can only be so self-aware. And I would just say to you all as leaders, every person you interact with has something to share with you that you want to know, and you want to really be open to that.
I love that notion. Come as you are, because then you can put your energy into the work and not into being something that you're not. I'm going to open it up to the room and see if there are a couple of questions here. And I think we've got mics going around. I have plenty more. There's a mic right over there. Just throw your hand up and we'll get a mic to you. If there's anything you'd like to ask these 3 esteemed folks, and I have more if you don't. Yes, please. And tell us who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Sarita Finney. I work at Johnson & Johnson, and I lead our baby care business there. So a question for all of you, whoever wants to take it. You all grew up through one sort of functional expertise and then transitioned in a way to leading an entire organization. And so you're leading employees who are skilled in functions that you know nothing about, presumably. How do you make that transition from a functional leader to a complete general manager?
I can throw in some thoughts on that. My first job out of business school, I was at Amazon, and I had come from investment banking, and I was put on charge of a team. I was a toy buyer. And so I managed a team of merchandisers who had been buying in the category for years and years, much more experienced than me. And I came into that role. And I think there's a couple things, right? One, you do have to acknowledge what you don't know. And you have to be really, really sort of clear with everybody up front that, and acknowledge the fact that you don't have the experience. And then I think what you do is you look for the ways in which your experience amplifies their experience, and how can you actually add value. For me, I came into a category where everyone was buying based on gut, and I was this ex-investment banker who could model anything in Excel. And so where I could add value to my team was using data to help them make better decisions so that they could succeed. And then I think the last thing I learned from that experience when you're trying to like expand to functions is you have to be willing to learn, walk a day in their shoes, do the work, and then you take responsibility when the team screws up. And I think when you do that, you will be able to kind of get the most out of sort of complementary skill sets. I don't think you have to have experience literally in every function in order to run it. What you have to be able to do is find ways to inspire and add value to your team.
Jenny, you want to take a crack at that, or Dave?
I was just going to add one thing, which is that as a manager, I think your ultimate job is to make your people successful. And so sort of flipping that on its head a little bit, like you don't need to know everything. You probably need to know enough, and these two do it day in, day out. I don't. But the ability to respect someone enough and know enough and then say, tell me what barriers you're facing or how I knock them down for you. So, and I think you can do that no matter what you sort of grew up in, what lane.
Yeah, and I guess being a CEO, not something that I'd ever done before. And I remember seeing, reading about all these really successful founders and entrepreneurs, and reading about their stories on the cover of magazines, and it seemed like they had everything figured out from day one, and they had the entire business plan, the entire organization. Every step was really well thought through ahead of time, and then got to meet some of these people and realize that when they were kind of at the stage that I was in the early days, that no one had any idea what they were doing, that they kind of just figured out as they go along. But what's most important is being really clear about your values and kind of your North Star, and staying focused on that, and saying no to everything else. And so I think that's really what I focused on, and then trying to hire people that are just better than me at kind of in every functional area, and being clear about what we need to be successful as a business, being clear about our values, and then getting out of their way.
So in the context, one more question. Yes, right up front.
Mike Rothman, co-founder, CEO of Fatherly, digital media company for parents. So in many ways, vulnerability has become the new brunch. Everybody talks about how they practice it, they love. I'm more interested
Then
in
they go home and drink champagne.
Right. But I'm more interested in in the path to self-awareness. And one thing that people don't talk about is the role of coaching or mentorship. Like, I imagine a lot of people here actually have an executive coach. The role, especially if you've never been a CEO before, and you have a lot of responsibility all of a sudden, like coaching actually plays a really big role. So I'd be curious, for those who use a coach or those who simply have a mentor, what role does that person play?
So I when I stepped in as CEO, I got a coach, and I think that's been helpful. But for me, I'd say the most important components to like the path to self-awareness have actually come from surprising places. So actually, one, like those in my personal life, my husband, my friends, sometimes I think we underestimate how similar we are and where our blind spots are, as we are in our personal lives as our professional lives. And actually, like, I've gotten a lot of really honest, difficult, really useful feedback from the people who've frankly seen me at my worst and in the most difficult situations. So for me, that's been a really big one. And then I think the other one is, and this is, I think, the key to doing it in a consistent way, is, again, building a culture where the people under you and your peers, like those around you, are comfortable calling you out. And if you can come up with a way to do that, by calling yourself out, by explicitly creating that as a norm on your team, it can be extremely powerful. And I ask every week, I have like time blocked on my calendar where I'm going to give someone really positive and negative real-time feedback. And I ask the same from the people who report to me. And you would be surprised once people are given the permission to do that, how empowering it is for them, and then ultimately useful it is for you. So that's been my experience.
And I would say there's a book, if you haven't read it, called Radical Candor. You're like, of course I've read it, yeah. The truth is coaching is so incredible. And so it's something I think most founders did not do. And maybe in the corporate world you guys did, but founders did not do. And now every founder who can afford to do so is doing it because it's pretty invaluable. Because I no longer lead. I work with my founders. I invested in a company called BetterUp to provide coaching to more junior people in large organizations because the data showed that that is such a better spend of the L&D budget than in sending them off to leadership conferences or whatnot. So I guess the point is the data is supportive, that it's incredibly helpful, but not everyone can have it. And even if you can, you probably can't afford it for everyone on your team. So I think going back to Anjali's point, like trying to have it be a part of the culture where it's actually feedback is desired, not just accepted, but like wanted. It's seen as a gift. And the only way it can be done is if people are not defensive. And the only way people can be not defensive is to feel safe and to feel like they belong.
I'll just add, I think we've done quite a bit of this at the Times. The thing that doesn't get talked about coaching is how much more is required of people to collaborate today. Product people working with engineers, working with marketing people, working with data people. And we've used coaches quite effectively to like literally see the blind spots in how teams work together. And I think your job as a leader and an executive is in part finding those, pointing them out, and fixing them for other people. So I want to say to all of you, thank you so much for being here. Anjali, Dave, Jenny, I think we got come as you are, know who you are, and apologize on the days that you don't get it right and show up for another one. Thank you so much for this great conversation, and look forward to spending the next 24 hours with all of you.